The silent figure moved through the abandoned warehouse like smoke, her footsteps making no sound on the concrete floor littered with debris. Outside, the sounds of urban warfare echoed through the streets of Detroit's industrial district, where National Guard units had been deployed to contain what the media called the worst civil unrest in American history. But inside this forgotten building, something extraordinary was about to unfold that would challenge everything the military thought it knew about heroism, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Major Rebecca Chen pressed herself against the cold brick wall, her night vision goggles scanning the darkness ahead. 23 years old and already commanding a company of soldiers in the most volatile domestic deployment since the 1960s, she carried the weight of impossible decisions on her shoulders. The riots had been raging for 6 days, sparked by a controversial police shooting, and the situation was deteriorating by the hour. Her orders were clear: secure the industrial corridor, protect civilian infrastructure, and maintain order by any means necessary. But tonight something felt different. Her radio crackled with reports of a mysterious figure operating in the area, someone who seemed to appear wherever soldiers were in the greatest danger, someone who saved lives and then vanished without a trace. The reports were inconsistent, almost supernatural in their description. A woman in civilian clothes who moved like a ghost, who seemed to know exactly where the next attack would come from, who had pulled wounded soldiers from burning buildings and guided lost units to safety through the chaos of urban combat. The first time Rebecca heard about the Shadow Warrior, as the soldiers had begun calling her, was 3 days into the deployment. Sergeant Michael Torres, a veteran of 2 deployments to Afghanistan, had returned from a patrol with a story that seemed too incredible to believe. His squad had been pinned down by sniper fire in an abandoned shopping complex when a woman appeared seemingly from nowhere, wearing dark civilian clothing with her face obscured by a hood and tactical mask. Without a word, the mysterious figure had moved through the killing zone with impossible grace, drawing the sniper's fire away from Torres's position, while simultaneously directing his squad to a covered route of escape. When the smoke cleared and the immediate threat was neutralized, she was gone. No name, no unit identification, no explanation. Just the memory of someone who had risked her life to save theirs without asking for anything in return. Torres wasn't the only one with such a story. Over the following days, reports began filtering in from across the operational area. A woman matching the same description had been seen pulling civilians from a burning apartment building while National Guard units were still establishing a perimeter. She had appeared during a firefight between guardsmen and armed looters, providing covering fire that allowed the soldiers to withdraw safely. She had guided a lost supply convoy through back streets when their GPS failed, leading them away from an improvised explosive device that could have killed them all. Each encounter followed the same pattern. She appeared when soldiers were in mortal danger, provided exactly the assistance needed to save lives, and then disappeared before anyone could identify her or offer thanks. No one had seen her face clearly. No one knew her name or her background. She wore no uniform, carried no visible rank insignia, and seemed to operate completely outside the chain of command. Yet her tactical knowledge was flawless, her situational awareness was uncanny, and her courage was undeniable. Rebecca first encountered the Shadow Warrior on the 4th night of the deployment. Her company had been tasked with securing a neighborhood pharmacy that had become a flashpoint for violence. Intelligence suggested that armed groups were using the building as a staging area for attacks on government forces, and Rebecca's orders were to clear the structure and establish a security perimeter. The operation had gone wrong from the beginning. What should have been a routine security sweep had turned into a complex urban battle when her soldiers discovered that the building was rigged with improvised explosive devices. Worse, they had encountered unexpected resistance from well-armed and apparently well-trained adversaries who seemed to know exactly how National Guard units operated. Within minutes, Rebecca's company was pinned down in a crossfire that threatened to turn deadly. Rebecca was crouched behind an overturned car, coordinating with her squad leaders over the radio, when she saw movement in her peripheral vision. A figure in dark clothing was moving along the roofline of a building across the street, using the shadows and architectural features to remain nearly invisible. For a moment, Rebecca thought she was seeing an enemy sniper positioning for a shot. She raised her rifle and prepared to engage. Then the figure dropped something over the edge of the building. Rebecca watched as a small object arced through the air and landed precisely between two of the hostile positions that had been keeping her soldiers pinned down. The explosion that followed was perfectly timed and positioned to neutralize the threat without endangering any of the guardsmen. In the confusion that followed, Rebecca's soldiers were able to advance and secure their objective. When Rebecca looked back to the rooftop, the figure was gone. No trace remained of whoever had provided the perfectly timed assistance that had probably saved several lives. Her soldiers completed their mission successfully, but Rebecca found herself haunted by questions about their mysterious benefactor. Who was she? How had she known exactly where Rebecca's unit was operating? And why was she risking her life to help soldiers she didn't know? The mystery deepened the following day when Rebecca received a briefing from Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, the operations commanding officer. Patterson was a career soldier with 25 years of experience, including multiple combat deployments, and a reputation for running tight, disciplined operations. He was not the kind of man who believed in ghost stories or supernatural explanations for military events. "Chen," Patterson said as Rebecca entered his temporary command post, "I need to talk to you about the reports your soldiers have been filing regarding this so-called shadow warrior." Rebecca sat down across from her commander, noting the mixture of skepticism and concern in his expression. "Sir, I've reviewed all the reports from my company. The accounts are consistent across multiple witnesses and incidents. Someone is operating in our area of responsibility, providing assistance to our forces." Patterson opened a thick folder on his desk. "It's not just your company, Chen. I've got reports from 7 different units describing encounters with this individual. The descriptions match, the pattern of behavior is consistent, and the tactical impact has been significant. But here's what's bothering me." He pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk between them. The image was grainy, taken from a security camera in one of the buildings where the shadow warrior had been reported. It showed a figure in dark clothing moving through a hallway, but the face was obscured and the body language was too ambiguous to provide definitive identification. What caught Rebecca's attention was the timestamp on the image. "This photograph was taken at the same time your unit reported contact with the individual," Patterson continued. "But according to our operational logs, there were no other friendly forces in this area. No special operations units, no intelligence personnel, no federal agents. Whoever this person is, she's not operating under any official authority that I can identify." Rebecca studied the photograph, trying to discern any details that might provide clues about the mysterious figure's identity. The clothing appeared to be high-quality tactical gear, but without any visible unit patches or identifying marks. The posture suggested someone with military training, but the equipment loadout was unlike anything used by regular National Guard units. "Sir, regardless of her official status, this individual has saved American lives. My soldiers are alive today because of her intervention." Patterson nodded grimly. "I understand that, Chen, and I'm not suggesting we treat her as hostile. But I have responsibilities that extend beyond the tactical level. If we have an unidentified operative working in our area, I need to know who she is, who she works for, and what her objectives are. The fact that she's helping us now doesn't guarantee she'll continue to do so." The conversation was interrupted by urgent radio traffic from one of the perimeter units. A National Guard convoy had been ambushed while transporting medical supplies to a hospital in the affected area. The attack had occurred in broad daylight on what should have been a secure route, and initial reports suggested heavy casualties among the guardsmen. Rebecca and Patterson rushed to the Tactical Operations Center, where communications personnel were coordinating the response to the ambush. The reports coming in were fragmentary and confused, but the situation was clearly serious. The convoy had been hit by what appeared to be a coordinated attack involving small arms fire, improvised explosive devices, and possibly rocket-propelled grenades. "Sir, we're getting reports of multiple casualties," the radio operator announced. "The convoy is requesting immediate medical evacuation and reinforcement." Patterson was reaching for the radio to coordinate a rescue operation when another transmission crackled through the speakers. This voice was different, calm and professional, but not one that any of the command staff recognized. "All units, this is Shepherd 6. I have eyes on the ambush site. Recommend you hold rescue operations for 30 seconds, and then approach from the northeast." The hostile positions will be neutralized momentarily. Patterson grabbed the radio microphone. Shepherd 6, identify yourself. What unit are you with? There was no response. Instead, the radio filled with the sounds of explosions and gunfire from the ambush site. The transmissions from the attacked convoy suddenly became more hopeful. The hostile fire was decreasing. The guardsmen were reporting that unknown forces were engaging the attackers from an unexpected direction. 3 minutes later, the convoy commander's voice came through clearly. All casualties have been extracted. The attack has been repelled. We're proceeding to the hospital under escort from an unidentified friendly. Rebecca and Patterson exchanged glances. The Shadow Warrior had struck again, appearing at exactly the right moment with exactly the right capabilities to turn a potential disaster into a successful operation. But this time she had used radio communications, suggesting a level of coordination and equipment that went beyond what a lone operative should possess. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued and intensified. The Shadow Warrior seemed to be everywhere at once, appearing whenever National Guard units were in the greatest danger. She provided intelligence warnings about impending attacks, she extracted wounded soldiers from dangerous positions, and she somehow managed to anticipate threats that even the Guard's sophisticated intelligence network missed. More importantly, her presence was changing the morale and effectiveness of the entire operation. Soldiers who had been demoralized by the complexity and danger of the urban environment began operating with new confidence, knowing that someone was watching over them. Units that had been struggling with the ambiguity of their rules of engagement found themselves making better decisions under pressure. The mysterious benefactor was not just saving individual lives, she was transforming the entire character of the deployment. But with each successful intervention, the questions about her identity became more pressing. Intelligence analysts pored over every piece of evidence, trying to determine who the Shadow Warrior was and how she was managing to operate so effectively. Security footage was enhanced and analyzed. Radio transmissions were recorded and voice-printed. Witnesses were interviewed and re-interviewed. Nothing provided a definitive answer. The woman remained a ghost, present when needed and invisible when not. Her tactical knowledge suggested military training, possibly at the highest levels. Her equipment indicated significant resources and possibly institutional support. But no agency claimed her, no unit acknowledged her, and no database contained any record of her existence. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into the deployment, when Rebecca's company was tasked with securing a collapsed bridge that had become a symbol of the civil unrest. The structure had been damaged by explosives set by unknown perpetrators, and its destruction had cut off emergency services to an entire neighborhood. Rebecca's mission was to establish security so that engineering units could assess the damage and begin repairs. The operation was routine until Rebecca's point squad reported movement in the abandoned buildings overlooking the bridge site. What they had initially dismissed as looters or curious civilians quickly revealed itself to be a coordinated observation effort. Someone was watching the National Guard operations with professional interest, and the watchers were positioned in a way that suggested hostile intent. Rebecca was repositioning her squads to address the potential threat when her radio crackled with a familiar voice. Guardian Leader, this is Shepherd 6. You have multiple hostile observation posts tracking your movement. Recommend you withdraw to your previous position and wait for my signal. This time, Rebecca was ready. Instead of following the mysterious advice immediately, she responded, Shepherd 6, I need you to identify yourself. We can coordinate more effectively if I know who you are. There was a long pause before the voice responded. Guardian Leader, there are bigger things at stake here than protocols. Trust me for 10 more minutes, and then all your questions will be answered. Rebecca made a command decision that would change everything that followed. Instead of withdrawing as suggested, she ordered her soldiers to maintain their positions but to be ready for immediate movement. Then she slipped away from her command post and began moving toward the position where she believed the radio transmission had originated. Her intuition proved correct. Moving carefully through the rubble-strewn streets, Rebecca spotted a figure on the rooftop of a partially collapsed office building. The woman was wearing the same dark clothing that had been described in dozens of previous encounters, and she was operating sophisticated communications equipment that definitely wasn't standard civilian gear. Rebecca climbed the damaged stairwell of the building as quietly as possible, her heart pounding as she approached what might finally be answers to all the questions that had been haunting the deployment. When she reached the rooftop access door, she paused for a moment to steel herself for whatever she might discover. The woman was exactly as the reports had described her. Medium height, athletic build, moving with the fluid precision of someone with extensive tactical training. Her face was hidden behind a tactical mask and hood, and her equipment was a mixture of military-grade communications gear and what appeared to be custom modifications that Rebecca didn't recognize. "I was wondering when someone would finally track me down," the Shadow Warrior said without turning around. Her voice was calm, professional, and surprisingly familiar. Rebecca stepped onto the rooftop with her weapon lowered but ready. "Ma'am, I'm Major Rebecca Chen, commanding Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 145th Infantry. I need you to identify yourself." The woman slowly turned around and reached up to remove her tactical mask. When her face was revealed, Rebecca felt her world shift fundamentally. She was looking at someone she had believed was dead, someone whose funeral she had attended, someone whose sacrifice had inspired her own decision to pursue military service. "Hello, Rebecca," said Captain Lisa Williams, Rebecca's former mentor, and the woman who had supposedly been killed in action 2 years earlier.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"I think it's time we had a conversation." Rebecca stared at the woman who had shaped her understanding of military leadership, the officer whose death had been a defining moment in her career, the hero whose example had guided her through the most difficult decisions of her life. Lisa Williams looked older, marked by experiences that Rebecca could only imagine, but unmistakably alive, and standing before her on a Detroit rooftop. "This is impossible," Rebecca whispered. "You're dead. I was at your memorial service. The Army presented your family with the Medal of Honor." Lisa's expression was a mixture of sadness and determination. "The woman you knew as Lisa Williams died in Afghanistan 2 years ago, but the person standing here survived for reasons that I'm only beginning to understand myself." The radio in Lisa's equipment pack crackled with urgent transmissions. The hostile observation posts that she had identified were moving into attack positions. Rebecca's soldiers were in immediate danger, and the conversation that could answer 2 years' worth of questions would have to wait. "Rebecca, I need you to trust me one more time," Lisa said, replacing her mask and checking her equipment. "Get your soldiers out of there now and I'll explain everything afterward. But if we don't move immediately, people are going to die." Rebecca looked into the eyes of the woman she had thought was dead and made another command decision. "Guardian units. This is Guardian Leader. Execute immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Alpha. All units acknowledge." As her soldiers began their tactical withdrawal, Rebecca watched Lisa Williams transform once again into the Shadow Warrior. The woman moved across the rooftops with impossible speed and precision, positioning herself to provide overwatch for the withdrawing guardsmen, while simultaneously calling in precise intelligence about the hostile positions. The attack that followed was exactly as Lisa had predicted, but Rebecca's early withdrawal meant that her soldiers were in covered positions when the shooting started. What could have been a devastating ambush became a minor skirmish with no friendly casualties. The Shadow Warrior had saved lives once again, but this time Rebecca knew who she was. When the immediate threat was neutralized, Rebecca found Lisa waiting for her at a predetermined rendezvous point in an abandoned warehouse several blocks away. The building provided cover from observation, and enough space for the conversation that had been 2 years in the making. "Before you ask," Lisa began, "let me tell you what I can. 2 years ago, Captain Lisa Williams was reported killed in action during a classified operation in Afghanistan. That report was accurate in every way that matters to the official record, but the person who survived that operation was recruited for something that doesn't officially exist." Rebecca sat down on a concrete barrier, trying to process what she was hearing. "What kind of something?" Lisa removed her tactical gear and sat down across from Rebecca. For the first time she looked like the mentor Rebecca remembered, though marked by experiences that had clearly changed her. "There are threats to American security that can't be addressed through normal military channels. Situations where official intervention would create more problems than it would solve. Sometimes the most effective way to protect American lives is to operate completely outside the system. The explanation raised more questions than it answered, but Rebecca could see that Lisa was struggling with how much she could reveal. Are you saying you faked your death to join some kind of black ops organization? I'm saying that sometimes good people have to make sacrifices that the rest of the world can never know about. My death allowed Lisa Williams to disappear, and that disappearance created opportunities to protect people in ways that a regular Army captain never could. Rebecca thought about the past 3 weeks, about the lives that had been saved, about the way the Shadow Warrior seemed to appear whenever soldiers were in the greatest danger. And that's what you've been doing here in Detroit, protecting soldiers. Lisa nodded. Among other things, the civil unrest here is more complicated than it appears. There are outside agitators, organized criminal elements, and even foreign actors who are trying to exploit the situation. Your National Guard deployment is walking into threats that your intelligence network doesn't even know exist. The conversation was interrupted by Rebecca's radio. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson was requesting her immediate return to the command post for an urgent briefing. Rebecca looked at Lisa, knowing that this might be their last opportunity to talk. I have to go, Rebecca said. But Lisa, whatever you're involved in, whatever organization you're working for, I need you to know that what you're doing matters. You've saved more lives in 3 weeks than some units save in an entire deployment. Lisa stood up and began gathering her equipment. Rebecca, there's something else you need to know. This deployment is about to get much more dangerous. The people behind the organized resistance have been planning something that could turn this civil unrest into a national crisis. Your soldiers are going to need all the help they can get. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the abandoned warehouse. What kind of something? The kind that requires someone to operate outside the rules to prevent a catastrophe. Lisa replied. The kind that might require good people to make choices that destroy their careers and their lives. As Rebecca prepared to leave, Lisa caught her arm. Rebecca, remember what I taught you about leadership. Sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that nobody else understands. Sometimes protecting the people you care about means accepting consequences that seem unbearable. Rebecca looked into the eyes of her former mentor, seeing wisdom earned through sacrifices she could barely imagine. Lisa, will I see you again? If you're lucky, you won't need to. Lisa replied, but if things go as badly as I think they will, the Shadow Warrior will be there when it matters most. Rebecca returned to her command post with her mind reeling from the revelations of the past hour. Lisa Williams was alive, operating under a false identity, and apparently working for an organization that didn't officially exist. The woman who had inspired Rebecca's military service was now protecting soldiers through methods that completely violated everything the military stood for. But Rebecca also understood that Lisa's actions, whatever their legal or ethical implications, had saved American lives. The Shadow Warrior had turned what could have been a disastrous deployment into a manageable operation. Her intelligence had prevented ambushes, her interventions had extracted wounded soldiers, and her presence had given the entire unit the confidence to operate effectively in an impossible environment. The briefing that Patterson had called was more serious than Rebecca had expected. Intelligence analysts had discovered evidence of a coordinated plan to attack the National Guard units during a planned peaceful demonstration the following day. The attack was designed to create maximum casualties among both soldiers and civilians, with the goal of escalating the civil unrest into something that would require federal intervention. The people behind this are professionals, Patterson explained to his assembled company commanders. They have military-grade weapons, they understand our tactics and procedures, and they've been planning this operation for weeks. Tomorrow's demonstration is going to be the most dangerous day of this deployment. Rebecca listened to the briefing while thinking about Lisa's warning that the deployment was about to get much more dangerous. The Shadow Warrior had known about the planned attack before the official intelligence network had identified it. Whatever organization Lisa was working for, they had sources and capabilities that went far beyond what the National Guard could access. Sir, Rebecca said when Patterson had finished his briefing, I recommend we request additional intelligence support for tomorrow's operation. There may be aspects of this threat that we haven't identified yet. Patterson nodded. I've already submitted requests up the chain, but don't expect miracles. We're going to be operating with the resources we have." That night, Rebecca lay awake in her temporary quarters, thinking about the conversation with Lisa and the impending crisis. She thought about the oath she had taken as an officer, the responsibility to protect and serve that had guided every decision of her military career. She thought about the soldiers under her command, young men and women who trusted her to make the right choices when their lives were on the line. Most of all, she thought about Lisa Williams, the mentor who had taught her that leadership sometimes meant making decisions that nobody else could understand. Tomorrow would test everything Rebecca had learned about command, about moral courage, and about the price of protecting the people she cared about. The demonstration was scheduled to begin at noon, but Rebecca's soldiers were in position by dawn. Intelligence suggested that the attack would come during the peak of the crowd activity, when the maximum number of people would be present to witness the violence. Rebecca's company was responsible for the eastern approach to the demonstration area, a position that put them directly in the path of the anticipated assault. As the morning progressed, Rebecca found herself scanning the rooftops and abandoned buildings for any sign of the shadow warrior. She knew that Lisa was out there somewhere, probably with better intelligence about the impending attack than anyone in the official command structure. The knowledge that her former mentor was watching over the operation provided some comfort, but it also raised troubling questions about the nature of authority and loyalty. At 11:30, Rebecca's radio crackled with a transmission that chilled her blood. "Guardian Leader, this is Shepherd 6. The attack is beginning early. You have multiple hostile teams moving to surround your position. Recommend immediate withdrawal to secondary positions." Rebecca looked at her watch. The demonstration wasn't supposed to begin for another 30 minutes, and her orders were to maintain her current position until further notice. But Lisa's intelligence had been flawless throughout the deployment, and her warnings had saved lives on multiple occasions. "All Guardian units, this is Guardian Leader," Rebecca transmitted. "Execute movement to secondary positions immediately. This is not a drill." As her soldiers began their tactical repositioning, Rebecca saw the first signs that Lisa's warning had been accurate. Armed figures were moving through the abandoned buildings on both sides of her original position, clearly intending to establish a crossfire that would have trapped her entire company. The early movement had probably saved dozens of lives. But Rebecca also knew that her decision to withdraw without explicit orders would require explanation to Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. She had chosen to trust the intelligence provided by someone who didn't officially exist, someone whose very presence in the operational area violated numerous regulations and protocols. The attack, when it came, was even more coordinated and sophisticated than the intelligence briefings had suggested. The hostile forces had military-grade equipment, professional tactics, and detailed knowledge of National Guard procedures. What should have been a peaceful demonstration became a complex urban battle that stretched across multiple city blocks. Rebecca's company found itself in the center of the fighting, but their early repositioning meant they were in defensive positions rather than caught in the open. Her soldiers were holding their ground, but barely, and casualties were mounting as the day progressed. It was during the height of the battle that Rebecca saw the Shadow Warrior in action for the final time. Lisa appeared in the middle of the firefight, moving through the chaos with impossible grace and precision. She wasn't just providing intelligence anymore. She was actively engaging hostile forces, coordinating defensive operations, and somehow managing to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment to prevent disaster. Rebecca watched in amazement as Lisa single-handedly neutralized a sniper team that had been pinning down one of her squads. She saw her former mentor guide a wounded soldier to safety while under heavy fire. Most incredibly, she witnessed Lisa coordinate a complex flanking maneuver that broke the back of the hostile assault and saved the entire operation. But she also saw something else. As Lisa moved through the battle, other soldiers began to notice her presence. National Guardsmen, who had been struggling with the chaos of urban combat, suddenly began operating with new confidence and coordination. Veterans who had been questioning their ability to handle the situation found themselves making tactical decisions with the kind of clarity that usually came only with extensive experience. The effect was unmistakable. The presence of the Shadow Warrior was transforming the entire character of the battle, not just through her direct actions but through the inspiration she provided to every soldier who saw her. Men and women who had been overwhelmed by the complexity of their situation were suddenly fighting like the elite troops they had never believed they could be. When the smoke cleared and the immediate threat was neutralized, Rebecca found herself standing in the aftermath of what could have been a national catastrophe. The coordinated attack had been repelled, civilian casualties had been minimized, and her soldiers had performed far beyond anyone's expectations. But she also knew that the success of the operation had depended heavily on intelligence and support that couldn't be acknowledged in any official report. That evening, as Rebecca completed her after-action reports, she struggled with how to describe the day's events. How could she explain that her tactical decisions had been based on intelligence provided by someone who didn't exist? How could she acknowledge the role that the Shadow Warrior had played without compromising whatever organization Lisa was working for? In the end, Rebecca wrote her reports according to standard procedures, describing the actions of her soldiers and the tactical decisions that had led to success. She made no mention of the mysterious figure who had been instrumental in saving American lives. The Shadow Warrior remained what she had always been, a ghost who appeared when needed and disappeared when her work was done. But Rebecca carried the memory of Lisa Williams, the mentor who had taught her that leadership sometimes meant making impossible choices for reasons that others might never understand. She carried the knowledge that there were people willing to sacrifice everything, including their own identities, to protect others. And she carried the responsibility to live up to the example set by someone who had given up everything to serve in the shadows. The deployment ended 2 weeks later, with the civil unrest finally brought under control and the National Guard units returning to their home stations. Rebecca's company had performed exceptionally throughout the operation, earning commendations and recognition for their effectiveness under extremely difficult conditions. But Rebecca knew that their success had been made possible by someone who would never receive official recognition, someone whose sacrifices would never be acknowledged in any military record. The Shadow Warrior had saved lives, prevented a national crisis, and inspired an entire generation of soldiers to perform beyond their perceived limitations. As Rebecca prepared to leave Detroit, she received one final message from Lisa Williams. It was a simple text message sent to her personal phone. "Thank you for trusting me. Remember that sometimes the most important service happens in the shadows. The example you set today will inspire others to make difficult choices when their time comes." Rebecca never saw Lisa Williams again, but she carried the lessons learned during that deployment throughout the rest of her military career. She understood that service sometimes required operating outside the normal boundaries, that protection sometimes demanded sacrifice, and that the most important heroism often went unrecognized and unacknowledged. Years later, when Rebecca had risen to senior command positions herself, she would occasionally receive reports of mysterious figures appearing to help American forces in crisis situations around the world. The details varied, but the pattern was always the same: someone operating outside official channels providing exactly the assistance needed to save lives, and then disappearing without seeking recognition or reward. Rebecca never knew if these reports involved Lisa Williams or others like her, but she understood that they represented something essential about military service. They represented the willingness to sacrifice personal recognition for the greater good, the courage to operate in moral complexity, and the dedication to protecting others regardless of personal cost. The Shadow Warrior had taught Rebecca that true heroism often required invisibility, that the most important battles were sometimes fought by people whose names would never be recorded in history books.
In a world where service was often measured by medals and recognition, Lisa Williams had shown that the highest form of courage was the willingness to serve in complete anonymity. And so Rebecca carried forward the legacy of her mentor, teaching other young officers that leadership sometimes meant making decisions that nobody else could understand, that protection sometimes required operating outside the normal rules, and that the most important service often happened in the shadows where no one would ever know to offer thanks. The story of the Shadow Warrior became legend among the soldiers who had served in Detroit, passed down through informal networks and quiet conversations. It became a reminder that heroism took many forms, that service extended beyond official duties, and that sometimes the most important people in any operation were those whose contributions could never be officially acknowledged. But for Rebecca Chen, The mystery of the Shadow Warrior was more than just a story. It was a foundational truth about military service, about sacrifice, and about the courage required to protect others in a world where the most important work often happened in complete darkness. Lisa Williams had shown her that true warriors sometimes fought without uniforms, served without recognition, and sacrificed everything without ever being able to explain why their choices mattered. The woman who had once been Captain Lisa Williams continued to serve in ways that defied every regulation and protocol, but her service was no less real for being invisible. She had become something beyond rank and structure, beyond recognition and reward. She had become the embodiment of selfless service, the living proof that protection sometimes required the complete surrender of personal identity. And in the shadows of conflicts around the world, the legend of the Shadow Warrior continued to inspire soldiers who faced impossible choices, reminding them that courage sometimes meant operating outside every rule they had been taught to follow, that heroism sometimes required the willingness to disappear completely in service of something greater than themselves. The emergency briefing at Fort Hamilton occurred at 0300 hours, 6 weeks after the Detroit deployment officially ended. Rebecca sat in the sterile conference room alongside 12 other field-grade officers, all summoned without explanation to the classified intelligence facility buried beneath the base's administrative complex. The concrete walls bore no decorations except for security warnings, and a digital clock that seemed to count down towards something ominous. Colonel Maria Santos entered carrying a thick red folder marked with classification levels that Rebecca had never seen before. Santos was Deputy Director of Military Intelligence Operations, a woman whose reputation for handling impossible situations had earned her access to the military's most sensitive programs. Her presence at this briefing suggested that whatever they were about to discuss went far beyond routine operational planning. Ladies and gentlemen, Santos began without preamble, what you're about to learn will fundamentally change your understanding of national security operations. Everything discussed in this room is classified at the highest levels. Violation of these protocols will result in immediate court-martial and federal prosecution. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. She had been wondering for weeks why her after-action reports from Detroit had disappeared into bureaucratic channels without the usual feedback and follow-up. Now she suspected she was about to learn the answer. Santos opened the red folder and removed a series of photographs. The images showed various conflict zones around the world, but they all shared a common element, evidence of mysterious interventions that had saved American lives while operating completely outside official military channels. Urban warfare in Syria, counterinsurgency operations in Colombia, peacekeeping missions in the Balkans. Each photograph captured moments where unidentified individuals had appeared to provide crucial assistance to American forces. For the past 18 months we have documented 47 separate incidents involving what we're calling ghost operatives, Santos continued. These individuals appear during high-risk operations, provide tactical support that prevents American casualties, and then disappear without leaving any trace in official records. Rebecca recognized the pattern immediately. It was exactly what she had witnessed in Detroit, the same impossible precision and timing that had characterized the Shadow Warrior's interventions. But she had assumed that Lisa Williams was a unique case, a single individual operating under extraordinary circumstances. Major Chen, Santos said, focusing her attention directly on Rebecca, your reports from Detroit describe encounters with someone matching this operational profile. We need to understand exactly what you observed. Rebecca had prepared for this moment during the weeks since returning from deployment. She had known that eventually someone would ask detailed questions about the Shadow Warrior, and she had struggled with how much she could reveal without compromising Lisa Williams or whatever organization she represented. Ma'am, my unit encountered an individual who provided tactical intelligence and direct assistance during several high-risk operations. This person operated with exceptional skill, and appeared to have access to intelligence sources that exceeded our own capabilities. Santos studied Rebecca's expression carefully. Major, your official reports make no mention of direct communication with this individual, but radio logs from your deployment suggest otherwise. Rebecca felt the weight of scrutiny from everyone in the room. These were senior intelligence officers who specialized in extracting information from reluctant sources. Her carefully crafted responses would not satisfy them for long. "Ma'am, the operational environment was complex and fluid. My primary responsibility was protecting my soldiers and completing our mission. I focused my reports on those activities rather than speculation about unconfirmed contacts." Santos nodded slowly, but her expression suggested that she understood exactly what Rebecca was avoiding. "Major Chen, let me be more direct. We have evidence that suggests these ghost operatives are not random individuals. They appear to be part of a coordinated program that operates with significant resources and sophisticated intelligence capabilities." The colonel removed another document from her folder, this one bearing the seal of the Central Intelligence Agency. 12 days ago, CIA analysts identified communications intercepts that reference an operation called Invisible Hand. The intercepts suggest that this operation involves the deployment of American personnel who have been officially declared dead but who continue to operate under deep cover identities. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Lisa Williams had been officially declared dead, and her Medal of Honor presentation had provided perfect cover for her disappearance from official records. If Santos was correct, Lisa was part of a larger program that recruited supposedly dead soldiers for clandestine operations. The implications of this discovery are staggering. Santos continued. If the United States government is operating a program that uses legally dead soldiers for unauthorized military actions, it represents a fundamental violation of both domestic and international law. Major David Thompson, a special operations officer sitting across from Rebecca, raised his hand. "Ma'am, if these operatives are protecting American lives, why are we treating this as a problem rather than an asset?" Santos's expression darkened. "Major Thompson, because we have no control over this program, no oversight of their operations, and no guarantee that their objectives align with official policy. These individuals possess detailed knowledge of American military procedures, but they operate completely outside the chain of command." She pulled out a final photograph, this one showing what appeared to be a training facility in a remote mountainous location. Satellite imagery suggests that Operation Invisible Hand maintains at least 3 major training facilities in locations that we have not been able to identify. The resources required for such an operation indicate sponsorship at the highest levels of government, but no official agency claims responsibility. Rebecca stared at the photograph, wondering if Lisa had trained at one of these mysterious facilities. The idea that her former mentor was part of a shadow military organization raised questions that Rebecca wasn't sure she wanted answered. "Your mission," Santos announced, "is to locate and identify these ghost operatives. We need to understand who they are, who they work for, and what their ultimate objectives might be. This is not a capture mission. Your orders are strictly reconnaissance and intelligence gathering." Colonel James Harrison, the senior officer present, spoke for the first time during the briefing. "Ma'am, what are our rules of engagement if we encounter these operatives in the field?" Santos was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Colonel, these individuals are technically American citizens who have been declared legally dead. They exist in a gray area of military law that has no clear precedent. Your instructions are to avoid direct confrontation while gathering as much intelligence as possible about their operations." Rebecca felt the moral complexity of the situation settling around her like a fog. She was being ordered to investigate and potentially expose people who had saved American lives, people who might include her own mentor. The mission required her to betray the trust of someone who had risked everything to protect her soldiers. After the briefing concluded, Rebecca found herself walking through the base housing area in the pre-dawn darkness, trying to process the implications of what she had learned. The comfortable certainties of military service had been replaced by questions that had no easy answers. Were the ghost operatives heroes or traitors? Was Operation Invisible Hand a necessary tool for protecting American interests, or a dangerous violation of democratic oversight? Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Liberty Bell, Independence Hall tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Rebecca recognized the phrasing pattern immediately. It was Lisa Williams, using the kind of coded communication that suggested she had anticipated this development. Rebecca spent the next 24 hours struggling with the decision of whether to attend the meeting. Her orders were clear: gather intelligence about ghost operatives and report back to Colonel Santos. Meeting with Lisa would provide exactly the kind of information that her superiors wanted. But it would also require her to betray someone who had saved her life and the lives of her soldiers. Independence Hall in Philadelphia was crowded with tourists when Rebecca arrived the following day. She wore civilian clothes and tried to blend in with the groups taking guided tours of the historic building. The irony of meeting in a place dedicated to the founding principles of American democracy was not lost on her as she prepared to confront questions about loyalty and constitutional authority. Lisa appeared at exactly noon, emerging from a group of visitors as if she had been there all along. She wore casual tourist clothing and carried a guidebook, but Rebecca could see the alertness in her posture that marked her as something other than a casual sightseer. "Thank you for coming," Lisa said quietly as she approached Rebecca. "I wasn't sure you would." Rebecca studied her former mentor's face, looking for some indication of her state of mind. Lisa appeared calm and controlled, but there was a tension around her eyes that suggested she understood the gravity of their situation. "Lisa, I need you to understand my position. I've been ordered to investigate Operation Invisible Hand. My superiors know about the ghost operatives, and they want answers." Lisa nodded without surprise. "I expected this would happen eventually. The program has been too active lately, too visible. It was only a matter of time before official channels started asking questions." They walked together through the exhibit halls, maintaining the appearance of casual tourists while conducting a conversation that could determine both of their futures. Rebecca felt the weight of the recording device in her pocket, the surveillance equipment that Colonel Santos had provided for this exact scenario. "Rebecca, before we go any further, I need you to make a choice. You can activate whatever recording equipment they gave you and gather the intelligence that your superiors want. Or you can listen to what I have to tell you and make your own decision about what's right." Rebecca felt her heart racing. Lisa had anticipated the surveillance, which meant she understood exactly what kind of pressure Rebecca was under. The choice she presented was between duty to her chain of command and loyalty to someone who had repeatedly risked her life to protect American soldiers. "Tell me about Operation Invisible Hand," Rebecca said, leaving the recording device inactive. Lisa guided her toward a quiet corner of the museum, where they could speak without being overheard. The program began 4 years ago when intelligence agencies identified a gap in American capabilities. There were threats that required immediate response but couldn't be addressed through official channels because of political constraints or diplomatic considerations. She explained that Operation Invisible Hand recruited soldiers who had been severely wounded in combat operations, soldiers whose official deaths provided cover for their recruitment into the Shadow program. These individuals underwent extensive medical treatment and training before being deployed to situations where their legally dead status allowed them to operate without creating political complications. "The program has prevented 3 major terrorist attacks on American soil," Lisa continued. "It has extracted American hostages from situations where official rescue operations would have created international incidents. It has provided intelligence that has saved thousands of lives, both military and civilian." Rebecca listened carefully, understanding that every word was potentially incriminating both Lisa and the organization she represented. "Who authorizes these operations? Who provides the oversight?" Lisa's expression grew more serious. "That's where the situation becomes complicated. The program operates under authority that was established through classified presidential findings, but those findings were issued by previous administrations. Current political leadership may not even be aware of its existence." The implications were staggering. Rebecca was learning about a military program that operated with presidential authority, but without current oversight, that used legally dead soldiers for operations that violated numerous laws and treaties, and that had saved American lives while operating completely outside democratic accountability. "Lisa, you're describing a program that fundamentally violates civilian control of the military. How can you justify participating in something like that?" Lisa was quiet for a long moment, staring at the exhibits that celebrated the founding of American democratic institutions. "Rebecca, do you remember what I taught you about the difference between legal authority and moral responsibility?" Rebecca did remember. During her early training, Lisa had emphasized that officers sometimes faced situations where following orders and protecting people required different courses of action. She had stressed that leadership meant making decisions based on principle rather than convenience. "I remember, but this is different. You're talking about a program that operates completely outside constitutional authority." Lisa turned to face Rebecca directly. 6 months ago, Operation Invisible Hand prevented a nuclear weapon from being smuggled into New York Harbor. The threat was real, immediate, and absolutely catastrophic. Official agencies were aware of the general threat but couldn't locate the specific shipment because of jurisdictional limitations and diplomatic constraints. She described how ghost operatives had tracked the weapon through international criminal networks, operating in countries where American military presence would have created international crises. Their legally dead status had allowed them to take actions that would have been impossible for official personnel. The weapon was neutralized 48 hours before it was scheduled to detonate in Manhattan. 8 million people are alive today because soldiers who don't officially exist prevented a catastrophe that the regular military couldn't address. Rebecca felt the weight of moral complexity pressing down on her. Lisa was describing operations that saved American lives but violated every principle of democratic oversight. The ghost operatives were heroes and criminals simultaneously, protecting the Constitution while operating completely outside its authority. But Lisa, where does it end? If this program can operate without oversight for nuclear threats, what prevents it from being used for any purpose that someone decides is necessary? Lisa's expression showed that she had struggled with the same questions. "That's why I'm talking to you, Rebecca. The program is at a crossroads. Some elements want to expand operations to become more aggressive in pursuing threats. Others believe we should scale back and operate more selectively." She explained that there was growing tension within Operation Invisible Hand about its scope and objectives.
Some ghost operatives believed they should focus exclusively on threats that official agencies couldn't address. Others argued that their unique capabilities should be used more broadly to protect American interests. "There's going to be a decision point soon," Lisa continued. "The program will either become more accountable to some form of oversight, or it will become completely autonomous. I'm hoping that people like you, people with integrity and judgment, will help guide that decision." Rebecca understood what Lisa was asking. She wanted Rebecca to become an intermediary between Operation Invisible Hand and official military channels, to help create some form of accountability for a program that currently operated without any oversight. "What exactly are you proposing?" Lisa glanced around to ensure they weren't being observed before responding. "I'm proposing that you report back to Colonel Santos with carefully selected information about the program. Information that acknowledges its existence while protecting its most sensitive operations. And I'm proposing that you help establish communication channels between the program and appropriate oversight authorities." The request was essentially asking Rebecca to become a double agent, providing information to her superiors while simultaneously protecting the program they were investigating. It would require her to make decisions about what information was appropriate to share and what details needed to remain classified. "Lisa, what you're asking could destroy my career and land me in federal prison. I would be deliberately withholding information from my chain of command while providing assistance to an unauthorized military program." Lisa nodded gravely. "I understand the risks, Rebecca, but I also know that you've seen what the program can accomplish. You've watched ghost operatives save American lives in situations where official military channels couldn't provide assistance." Rebecca thought about the soldiers in Detroit who were alive because the Shadow Warrior had appeared when they needed help most. She thought about the nuclear weapon that had supposedly been prevented from detonating in Manhattan. She thought about the moral complexity of serving institutions that sometimes required people to operate outside their own rules. "I need time to think about this," Rebecca said finally. Lisa handed her a small device that looked like an ordinary smartphone battery. "This is a secure communication device. If you decide to help, activate it and someone will contact you within 24 hours. If you decide to report everything to your superiors, destroy it and pretend this conversation never happened." As they prepared to part ways, Lisa caught Rebecca's arm. "Rebecca, remember that sometimes protecting people requires operating in spaces that official institutions can't reach. The question isn't whether Operation Invisible Hand is legal.
The question is whether you're willing to accept some moral ambiguity in order to save lives. Rebecca left Independence Hall carrying more questions than answers. She understood the moral arguments on both sides of the situation, but she also understood that her decision would have consequences that extended far beyond her personal career. If she chose to help Lisa, she would be enabling a program that operated outside democratic oversight. If she chose to expose the program completely, she might be preventing operations that could save American lives. The drive back to Fort Hamilton gave Rebecca time to consider the implications of everything she had learned. Operation Invisible Hand represented a fundamental challenge to civilian control of the military, but it also represented a practical response to threats that official agencies couldn't address through normal channels. The ghost operatives were violating numerous laws and treaties, but they were doing so in service of protecting American citizens. Rebecca thought about her oath as an officer, the commitment to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies. But she also thought about her responsibility to protect the soldiers under her command, the duty that had guided every decision of her military career. That evening, Rebecca sat in her quarters staring at the communication device that Lisa had given her. She understood that activating it would commit her to a course of action that could not be undone. She would become part of a conspiracy that operated outside legal authority, but also part of an organization that had repeatedly saved American lives. Her phone rang. Colonel Santos was calling with an update on the investigation into Operation Invisible Hand. Major Chen, we've received additional intelligence about ghost operative activities. I need you to come in for a debriefing tomorrow morning. Rebecca felt the walls closing in around her. Santos clearly suspected that Rebecca had made contact with one of the ghost operatives, and tomorrow's debriefing would probably include more aggressive questioning about her knowledge of the program. Yes, ma'am, I'll be there at 0800. After the call ended, Rebecca realized that her decision could not be delayed any longer. She would either activate Lisa's communication device and commit to helping Operation Invisible Hand, or she would report everything to Santos and let the military justice system determine the program's fate. Rebecca thought about the soldiers in Detroit who had trusted her to make the right decisions under pressure. She thought about Lisa Williams, who had given up her identity and legal existence to protect people who would never know her name. She thought about the nuclear weapon that had supposedly been prevented from devastating Manhattan. Most importantly, she thought about the kind of officer she wanted to be, the kind of leader who could navigate moral complexity without losing sight of fundamental principles. Lisa had taught her that leadership sometimes required making decisions that nobody else could understand, that protecting people sometimes meant accepting personal risk and moral ambiguity. Rebecca activated the communication device. Within 6 hours she received a message directing her to a meeting location in Washington, D.C. The instructions were precise and professional, indicating that Operation Invisible Hand had sophisticated operational procedures for recruiting new personnel. Rebecca understood that she was being drawn into something that would change her life irrevocably. The meeting location was a small coffee shop in Georgetown, chosen for its casual atmosphere and the privacy provided by ambient noise. Rebecca arrived early and selected a table that provided good visibility of the entrance while minimizing the risk of surveillance. She wore civilian clothes and carried a newspaper following the tradecraft protocols that had been included with her instructions. The man who approached her table was unremarkable in every way except for his eyes. He appeared to be in his 40s, with the bearing of someone who had spent significant time in military service, but nothing about his appearance would attract attention in a crowd. When he sat down, Rebecca noticed that his movements suggested extensive combat experience despite his civilian appearance. Major Chen, thank you for meeting with me. I'm Robert Stone, and I coordinate liaison activities for the program that Lisa Williams has told you about. Rebecca studied Stone's face, looking for some indication of his background and authority. He spoke with the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to handling sensitive situations, but his eyes suggested experiences that extended far beyond normal military service. Mr. Stone, I need to understand exactly what I'm getting involved in. Lisa has given me general information about Operation Invisible Hand, but I need specific details about how the program operates and what my role would be. Stone nodded approvingly. Direct questions deserve direct answers, Major. The program operates through a network of approximately 200 personnel who have been officially declared dead but who continue to serve in various capacities. Some are field operatives like Lisa Williams, others provide intelligence analysis, logistical support or coordination with official agencies. He explained that Operation Invisible Hand maintained training facilities in 3 countries, operated safe houses in dozens of major cities, and had access to resources that were provided through classified budget allocations that never appeared in public financial records. The program's annual budget exceeded that of many official intelligence agencies. Your role would be to serve as a communication channel between our operations and appropriate oversight authorities. When we identify threats that official agencies need to be aware of, you would provide that information through channels that protect both the source and the program's operational security. Rebecca understood that Stone was describing a position that would make her a spy within her own military, someone who would have access to classified information that she would selectively share based on criteria established by an unauthorized program. The role would require her to make constant decisions about loyalty, authority, and the appropriate balance between oversight and operational security. Mr. Stone, what you're describing would make me complicit in violations of federal law. How do you justify asking military officers to participate in illegal activities? Stone was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee while considering his response. Major Chen, the program operates under presidential findings that were issued in response to specific threats to national security. Those findings provided legal authority for activities that would otherwise violate various laws and treaties. He produced a document from his briefcase, a heavily redacted copy of what appeared to be a presidential finding authorizing the establishment of Operation Invisible Hand. The document bore the official seal of the president and was signed by officials from multiple intelligence agencies. The legal authority exists, but it's classified at levels that most military personnel will never see. Your participation would be authorized by the same presidential finding that established the program. Rebecca examined the document carefully, noting that most of the operational details had been redacted but that the authorization appeared to be genuine. If Stone was telling the truth, Operation Invisible Hand was not an illegal conspiracy but a classified program that operated under the highest levels of government authority. But you said earlier that current political leadership might not be aware of the program's existence. How can it operate under presidential authority if the president doesn't know about it? Stone's expression grew more serious. Major, that's one of the complications we're trying to address. The program was established under previous administrations, and the authority to continue operations was included in classified annexes to various national security documents. Current leadership has inherited the authority without necessarily being briefed on specific programs. Rebecca understood the implications immediately. Operation Invisible Hand was operating in a bureaucratic gray area where it had legal authority that might not be recognized by current political leadership. The program existed in a space between authorization and awareness that created enormous risks for everyone involved. What happens if current leadership discovers the program and decides to shut it down? Stone was quiet for a long moment before responding. That's why we need people like you, Major. People who understand both the military system and the program's objectives. If the program is going to continue operating, it needs some form of official oversight that acknowledges its existence while protecting its operational capabilities. Rebecca realized that she was being recruited to help solve one of the most complex problems in modern national security: how to maintain democratic oversight of programs that operated in spaces where traditional oversight couldn't function effectively. The role would require her to navigate between competing loyalties while serving the broader interests of national security. Mr. Stone, I need guarantees about the scope of activities that I would be asked to support. I won't participate in operations that target American citizens or that violate fundamental constitutional principles. Stone nodded approvingly. Major, the program operates under strict guidelines that prohibit domestic operations except in cases involving foreign threats to American soil. Lisa Williams' activities in Detroit were authorized because the civil unrest involved foreign agitators who were attempting to destabilize American government institutions. He explained that Operation Invisible Hand maintained rigorous oversight procedures for all activities, with multiple levels of authorization required for any operation that might affect American citizens. The program's mandate was specifically limited to threats that official agencies couldn't address through normal channels. Your participation would include access to those oversight procedures so you could verify that operations meet appropriate standards before providing support or information to official channels. Rebecca understood that Stone was offering her a role that would provide some measure of accountability for a program that currently operated with minimal oversight. She would become a bridge between Operation Invisible Hand and official military channels, helping to ensure that the program served legitimate national security interests rather than becoming a tool for unauthorized activities. What are the specific expectations for someone in this role? Stone outlined a position that would require Rebecca to maintain her normal military duties while providing periodic intelligence briefings to Operation Invisible Hand personnel. She would receive information about threats and operations that official agencies needed to be aware of, and she would determine the appropriate channels for sharing that information. The time commitment would be minimal under normal circumstances, perhaps 2 or 3 hours per month. But during crisis situations, you might be asked to provide more intensive support for coordination between the program and official response efforts. Rebecca realized that the role Stone was describing would allow her to serve both her official military responsibilities and her obligation to protect American lives. She would have access to information that could prevent disasters while maintaining some measure of oversight over a program that desperately needed accountability. I have one final question, Mr. Stone. What happens to people who participate in this program if political winds change and the program becomes a liability? Stone's expression showed that he had considered this question carefully. Major, the program maintains extensive documentation of its legal authority and operational successes. Personnel who participate in authorized activities are protected by the same presidential findings that established the program. But ultimately, service in this role requires accepting some level of personal risk in exchange for the opportunity to protect American lives. Rebecca understood that Stone was acknowledging the fundamental truth about Operation Invisible Hand. Participation required courage not just in the face of enemy action but in the face of potential prosecution by the very government they were serving. It was the ultimate test of commitment to protecting people rather than protecting institutions. Mr. Stone, I'll need 48 hours to consider your offer. Stone handed her a secure phone and a set of communication protocols. Major, take all the time you need. But understand that the threats we're dealing with don't wait for bureaucratic processes. Every day that passes without proper coordination between our activities and official channels is a day when American lives are at risk. Rebecca left the meeting carrying the weight of a decision that would define the rest of her career and possibly her life. She understood that accepting Stone's offer would commit her to operating in moral and legal gray areas that most military officers never encountered. But she also understood that declining would mean abandoning people who had repeatedly risked their lives to protect American interests. The next morning brought Rebecca's scheduled debriefing with Colonel Santos, a session that would test her ability to navigate between competing loyalties without compromising either her official duties or her potential obligations to Operation Invisible Hand. She entered the intelligence facility, knowing that her responses would be carefully analyzed for any indication that she had made contact with ghost operatives. Major Chen, Santos began. We've received additional intelligence suggesting that ghost operatives have been more active than we initially realized. I need you to review these materials and tell me if anything matches what you observed during your deployment to Detroit. Santos presented a series of photographs and reports documenting mysterious interventions in military operations around the world. The evidence was overwhelming. Operation Invisible Hand was conducting dozens of operations annually, saving American lives while operating completely outside official oversight. Rebecca studied the materials carefully, recognizing patterns that matched her experiences with Lisa Williams, but also seeing evidence of activities that extended far beyond anything she had witnessed personally. The scope of the program was much larger than she had imagined, with implications for American foreign policy and military operations that she was only beginning to understand. Ma'am, some of these reports describe interventions that appear similar to what my unit experienced in Detroit. But the scope of activities documented here suggests something much more extensive than isolated incidents. Santos nodded grimly. Major, we believe that Operation Invisible Hand represents one of the largest unauthorized military programs in American history. The resources required for these activities indicate support at the highest levels of government, but we haven't been able to identify who's providing authorization or oversight. Rebecca felt the weight of knowledge that she couldn't share pressing down on her. She knew that the program operated under presidential authority, but revealing that information would expose her contact with Stone and potentially compromise Operation Invisible Hand's security. Ma'am, have you considered the possibility that these activities are authorized through classified channels that aren't accessible through normal intelligence processes? Santos studied Rebecca's expression carefully. Major, are you suggesting that Operation Invisible Hand might be a legitimate government program rather than an unauthorized conspiracy? Rebecca realized that she had reached a decision point that would determine her future relationship with both Operation Invisible Hand and her official chain of command. She could continue to withhold information and hope that someone else would establish appropriate oversight, or she could begin the process of helping both sides understand each other's perspectives and objectives. Ma'am, I'm suggesting that the scope and sophistication of these operations indicate resources and authority that probably exceed what a conspiracy could maintain. Perhaps our investigation should focus on identifying legitimate oversight channels rather than treating this as a purely adversarial situation. Santos was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of Rebecca's suggestion. Major Chen, are you recommending that we attempt to establish communication with these ghost operatives rather than simply gathering intelligence about their activities? Rebecca felt her heart racing as she realized that she was about to cross a line that would commit her to serving as an intermediary between official military channels and Operation Invisible Hand. Ma'am, I'm recommending that we consider all possibilities for understanding and potentially coordinating with activities that appear to be protecting American lives. Santos closed the file and leaned back in her chair. Major, I'm going to be direct with you. We have communications intercepts suggesting that someone matching your profile has been in contact with Operation Invisible Hand personnel. If you have information that could help us understand this program, now is the time to share it. Rebecca understood that Santos was giving her an opportunity to come clean about her contacts with Lisa Williams and Robert Stone. The colonel was essentially offering immunity in exchange for cooperation, but accepting the offer would require Rebecca to expose people who had trusted her with their lives and their secrets. Ma'am, if such contact had occurred, what would be the government's position toward personnel who cooperated with the investigation? Santos smiled for the first time during their conversation. Major, personnel who provide assistance in understanding and potentially legitimizing Operation Invisible Hand would be serving the national interest. There would be no punitive action for activities that furthered appropriate oversight and accountability. Rebecca realized that Santos was offering her exactly what Robert Stone had proposed, an opportunity to serve as a bridge between Operation Invisible Hand and official oversight authorities. The colonel understood that cooperation was more likely to produce positive results than confrontation. Ma'am, I may have access to communication channels that could facilitate dialogue between our investigation and the people we're trying to understand. Santos nodded approvingly. Major Chen, I'm authorizing you to pursue those channels under my direct supervision. Our objective is to establish communication and potentially develop oversight procedures that acknowledge the program's existence while ensuring appropriate accountability. Rebecca felt a sense of relief that she hadn't expected. Instead of forcing her to choose between competing loyalties, the situation was evolving toward cooperation that would serve both her official duties and her obligation to protect the people who had trusted her. Ma'am, I'll need some time to establish contact and determine the appropriate approach for initiating dialogue. Santos handed Rebecca a secure communication device similar to the one that Stone had provided. Major, you have 48 hours to make contact. After that, we'll need to brief higher authority on our progress and recommendations. Rebecca left the intelligence facility understanding that she had successfully navigated the most dangerous phase of her involvement with Operation Invisible Hand. Instead of being forced to choose between her official duties and her personal loyalty, she had found a path that would allow her to serve both interests while potentially helping to establish the oversight that the program desperately needed. That evening, Rebecca activated both communication devices and sent messages to Stone and Santos indicating that she had established authorization for formal dialogue between their organizations. For the first time since learning about Operation Invisible Hand, She felt that she was serving the national interest rather than choosing between competing factions. The response from Stone came within hours. Operation Invisible Hand was prepared to discuss oversight procedures with appropriate military authorities. The response from Santos came the following morning. The intelligence investigation was being elevated to the highest levels of government, with Rebecca designated as the primary liaison for establishing communication protocols. Rebecca understood that she had achieved something that many people thought was impossible. She had helped to begin the process of bringing Operation Invisible Hand under appropriate oversight while preserving its ability to protect American lives. The ghost operatives would no longer be completely invisible, but they would retain the operational flexibility that made their interventions possible. The woman who had once been Captain Lisa Williams was about to emerge from the shadows, not as someone who had violated military law, but as someone who had served at the highest levels of national security despite the personal cost of her sacrifice. The Shadow Warrior was about to become something even more powerful, a symbol of service that operated within democratic oversight while maintaining the courage to serve in places where traditional military operations couldn't reach. The congressional hearing room filled with tension as Rebecca entered wearing her dress uniform, every ribbon and decoration reflecting years of dedicated service. 3 months had passed since establishing communication between Operation Invisible Hand and military intelligence, but the political implications had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a classified briefing had escalated into public hearings that would determine the fate of ghost operatives and the future of covert military programs. Senator Margaret Hayes, the committee chairwoman, called the session to order with grim efficiency. The media attention surrounding the revelation of Operation Invisible Hand had created a political firestorm that reached the highest levels of government. Questions about accountability, constitutional authority, and the proper limits of military action dominated headlines across the nation. Major Chen, Senator Hayes began, you stand at the center of one of the most significant national security controversies in recent memory. Your testimony today will help determine whether Operation Invisible Hand represents necessary innovation or dangerous overreach. Rebecca had prepared extensively for this moment, working with both military attorneys and congressional liaisons to craft testimony that would protect legitimate operations while acknowledging serious concerns about oversight and accountability. The stakes extended far beyond her personal career to the lives of ghost operatives who remained in the field and the future of programs that operated in legal gray areas. Senator, Operation Invisible Hand has prevented terrorist attacks, saved American hostages and protected military personnel in situations where official intervention was impossible. However, these successes occurred within a framework that lacked adequate oversight and accountability. The hearing room buzzed with quiet conversations as Rebecca's opening statement established the complexity of the situation. She was simultaneously defending and criticizing the program, acknowledging its necessity while insisting on reforms that would bring it under democratic control. Senator David Rodriguez, the ranking minority member, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. Major Chen, are you telling this committee that the United States government has been operating a shadow military using soldiers who are legally dead? Rebecca felt the weight of public scrutiny as cameras captured every expression and gesture. Senator, I'm telling you that threats to American security sometimes require responses that can't be addressed through conventional military channels. Operation Invisible Hand filled that gap, but it did so without the oversight that democratic institutions require. The questioning continued for hours, with senators from both parties struggling to understand how such a program could operate for years without congressional knowledge. Rebecca provided carefully prepared answers that acknowledged the program's existence while protecting operational details that could compromise ongoing missions. During a recess, Rebecca received an encrypted message on her secure phone. Lisa Williams was requesting an emergency meeting that evening. The message indicated that new developments had created urgent complications for ghost operatives in the field. The meeting location was a small park in Arlington, chosen for its privacy and the security provided by open spaces that made surveillance difficult. Rebecca arrived after dark, using counter-surveillance techniques that had become second nature during her months of serving as a liaison between competing organizations. Lisa emerged from the shadows wearing civilian clothes that did nothing to disguise her alertness and tactical readiness. 3 months of congressional scrutiny had taken its toll, evident in the tension around her eyes and the careful way she moved through the environment. Rebecca, we have a problem. The public hearings have compromised operational security for ghost operatives worldwide. 3 personnel have been identified by hostile intelligence services and 2 have gone missing in active operations. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. The political process designed to create accountability was endangering the lives of people who had sacrificed everything to protect American interests. The hearings intended to improve oversight were creating exactly the kind of exposure that made covert operations impossible. Lisa, what are you asking me to do? The hearings are proceeding according to congressional requirements. I can't influence the political process. Lisa's expression showed the strain of operating under unprecedented scrutiny. I'm asking you to remember why we started this process. The goal was to create oversight that protected both democratic accountability and operational capability. What's happening now threatens to destroy the program without replacing it with anything that can address the threats we've been handling. Rebecca understood the dilemma immediately. The congressional hearings had created political momentum that was difficult to control. Politicians who wanted to demonstrate their commitment to oversight were demanding transparency that would make covert operations impossible. The process of reform was becoming more destructive than the original lack of accountability. What are you proposing? Lisa handed her a sealed envelope containing what appeared to be operational summaries and threat assessments. I'm proposing that you testify about specific operations that demonstrate why this capability is necessary. Show them what we've prevented, not just what we've done. Rebecca examined the documents carefully, recognizing intelligence about terrorist plots, hostage situations, and international crises that had been resolved through ghost operative interventions. The scope of activities was staggering, involving threats that would have created national emergencies if they had succeeded. Lisa, testifying about these operations would require me to reveal classified information that could compromise ongoing investigations and future operations. Lisa nodded grimly. I understand the risks, but the alternative is watching the program be destroyed by politicians who don't understand the threats we're facing. Sometimes protecting people requires accepting personal risk. Rebecca felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling around her. She could protect operational security by limiting her testimony, but doing so might result in the destruction of a program that had saved thousands of lives. Alternatively, she could reveal enough information to demonstrate the program's necessity, but such revelations might compromise ongoing operations and endanger personnel in the field. Give me until tomorrow morning to review these materials and determine what can be safely disclosed. Lisa was preparing to leave when she caught Rebecca's arm. Rebecca, remember that sometimes the most important service happens when nobody's watching. Whatever you decide tomorrow, make sure it's based on protecting people rather than protecting institutions. The following morning brought the climactic day of the congressional hearings. Rebecca entered the hearing room knowing that her testimony would determine whether Operation Invisible Hand survived in some reformed version or was completely dismantled. The political pressure had intensified overnight, with editorial calls for complete transparency competing against national security warnings about the dangers of excessive disclosure. Senator Hayes called the session to order with obvious awareness that the day's proceedings would have lasting implications for American national security policy. Major Chen, yesterday's testimony established the existence and general scope of Operation Invisible Hand. Today we need to understand the specific justification for continuing such programs under appropriate oversight. Rebecca had spent the night reviewing Lisa's documents and consulting with legal advisors about the boundaries of permissible disclosure. Her testimony would need to demonstrate the program's necessity without compromising ongoing operations or endangering personnel who remained in the field. Senator, I request permission to provide classified testimony about specific operations that demonstrate the unique capabilities and necessity of ghost operative programs. The request for classified testimony created a brief recess while security personnel cleared the hearing room of media and unauthorized observers. When the session resumed, only senators with appropriate clearances and essential staff remained to hear details that could not be disclosed publicly. Rebecca began her classified testimony by describing the nuclear weapon that had been prevented from entering New York Harbor, providing enough detail to demonstrate the scope of the threat while protecting sources and methods that remained relevant to ongoing operations. She described hostage rescues that had prevented international incidents and intelligence operations that had disrupted terrorist networks planning attacks on American soil. The impact on the senators was immediate and profound. The abstract questions about oversight and accountability were replaced by concrete understanding of threats that required responses outside normal diplomatic and military channels. Rebecca watched as political posturing gave way to genuine concern about protecting capabilities that had repeatedly saved American lives. Senator Hayes spoke for the committee when she asked Major Chen, in your professional opinion, could these operations have been conducted through official military channels? Rebecca had prepared extensively for this question, understanding that her answer would shape the future of covert military programs. Senator, the operations I've described required personnel who could operate without official cover, in countries where American military presence would create diplomatic crises. The legally dead status of ghost operatives provided the operational flexibility necessary to address threats that official agencies couldn't reach. The questioning continued for several hours, with senators struggling to balance their oversight responsibilities against the operational requirements of addressing modern security threats. Rebecca provided carefully crafted answers that acknowledged the necessity of covert capabilities while insisting on accountability measures that would prevent abuse. The breakthrough came when Senator Rodriguez asked about potential reforms that could preserve operational capability while creating appropriate oversight. Rebecca had prepared for this moment, working with both Lisa Williams and Colonel Santos to develop proposals that would satisfy both operational and political requirements. Senator, I recommend the establishment of a joint congressional subcommittee with appropriate security clearances to provide ongoing oversight of ghost operative programs. This subcommittee would review operations quarterly, ensure compliance with constitutional requirements, and approve major operational changes while protecting the security that makes these operations possible. The proposal represented a compromise that acknowledged both the necessity of covert operations and the requirements of democratic oversight. Ghost operatives would continue to operate with the flexibility necessary to address threats that official agencies couldn't reach, but their activities would be subject to regular review by elected representatives with appropriate security clearances. Senator Hayes consulted with her colleagues before responding. Major Chen, this committee will recommend the establishment of such oversight procedures contingent on additional safeguards that ensure constitutional compliance and prevent mission creep. Rebecca felt a sense of relief mixed with anticipation. The hearing had achieved the goal of preserving ghost operative capabilities while creating the accountability that democratic institutions required. Operation Invisible Hand would continue, but under oversight that would prevent the abuses that had created the current crisis. The final phase of the hearing addressed Rebecca's personal situation and the implications of her role in bridging official and covert operations. Her actions had prevented a destructive confrontation between competing organizations, but they had also required her to operate in legal gray areas that raised questions about military discipline and chain of command authority. Major Chen, Senator Hayes concluded, your actions in this matter demonstrate the kind of moral courage that military service requires. You chose to serve the national interest even when it required accepting personal risk and operating outside normal procedures. The Congressional Committee's final report, issued 2 weeks later, established the framework for ongoing oversight of ghost operative programs while acknowledging their necessity for addressing modern security threats. Operation Invisible Hand was formally recognized as a legitimate government program operating under appropriate congressional oversight. Rebecca received notification of her promotion to lieutenant colonel along with assignment to head the newly established Office of Covert Operations Oversight. Her role would be to serve as the permanent liaison between ghost operative programs and congressional oversight authorities, ensuring that future operations met both operational requirements and democratic accountability standards. 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the Pentagon briefing room where her journey had begun, but now she addressed a room full of senior officers who were learning about reformed oversight procedures for covert operations. The ghost operatives were no longer completely invisible, but they retained the operational flexibility that made their interventions possible. Lisa Williams entered the briefing room wearing the uniform of a major in the Special Operations Command, her legal death officially reversed through classified procedures that allowed ghost operatives to return to acknowledged service. The woman who had once been the shadow warrior was now the commanding officer of the reformed Operation Invisible Hand. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca announced to the assembled officers, today we're implementing oversight procedures that balance operational necessity with democratic accountability. The personnel you're about to meet have served in the shadows for years, protecting American lives while operating outside official recognition. As Lisa stepped forward to brief the assembled officers about reformed ghost operative procedures, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The Shadow Warrior was no longer a mystery, but her service had created a legacy that would protect American lives for generations to come. The final transformation was complete. Rebecca had successfully bridged the gap between covert operations and democratic oversight, creating a framework that preserved necessary capabilities while ensuring appropriate accountability. The ghost operatives would continue to serve, but now they operated within institutions that acknowledged their sacrifice while protecting the flexibility that made their service possible. In the end, the mystery of the Shadow Warrior had been solved not through exposure and destruction but through evolution and integration. The woman who had once operated without uniform or recognition had become the foundation for a new model of service that honored both courage and accountability. Every soldier could now bow to the Shadow Warrior, not as a mysterious figure operating outside authority but as a symbol of service that transcended the boundaries between official duty and moral courage. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.